Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the stars. The year was 2387, and humans had built homes on 12 different star systems. New Horizon was the farthest colony from Earth, and Jake was in charge of keeping it safe. The colony had over 2 million people living there, and his wife Lisa worked as a doctor in the big medical center. Jake liked the quiet mornings when space looked peaceful. His fleet had 15 ships to protect the colony, and most days nothing happened. The ships were not the biggest or strongest, but the crews were good people who cared about their job. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the UHS Valor and always made jokes during their morning meetings. Lieutenant Commander Amy Price was the youngest ship captain in the fleet, and she was very smart about space battles. That morning started like any other day. Jake was drinking his coffee and reading reports when the alarms began to sound. His communications officer turned to him with a worried face and said that something big was coming through hyperspace. Jake put down his coffee and told everyone to get ready. He had no idea that this day would change everything for humans in space. The first alien ship that came out of hyperspace was huge. It was 3 times bigger than any human ship and covered in dark metal that seemed to eat light. Then another ship appeared, and another and another. Jake counted them as they kept coming, and his heart began to beat faster. 20 ships became 50, and 50 became 100. When they stopped coming, there were 200 alien warships, floating in space near New Horizon. Jake had never seen ships like these before. They had strange shapes with long spikes coming out of them, and their hulls glowed with a red light that made him feel cold inside. The biggest ship was in the front, and it was so large that Jake could see cities built on its surface. He knew, right away, that his 15 ships could not fight against this fleet and win. The alien ships moved closer to New Horizon, and Jake told his crew to send a message asking who they were and what they wanted. The answer came back in perfect human language, which surprised everyone. A deep voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone filled the bridge and introduced himself as War Marshal Zethkol of the Kethvar Dominion. The alien leader explained that his people had conquered 47 different species across the galaxy. He said that humans could surrender now and become slaves, or they could fight and die. He gave Jake 1 hour to decide, and then the transmission ended. The bridge became very quiet as everyone tried to understand what had just happened. Jake immediately called Admiral Kate Sullivan back on Earth, but he knew that help would take weeks to arrive. He also called his wife Lisa on the planet below and told her to start getting people ready to leave. Lisa was scared, but she promised to help organize the evacuation. Jake could hear explosions in the background as the colony's defense systems came online. The problem was simple but terrible. New Horizon had thousands of civilian transport ships, but they were slow and could only carry a few hundred people each. Even if every ship worked perfectly, it would take days to get everyone off the planet. The alien fleet would never wait that long, and Jake knew they would destroy any ship that tried to leave. Captain Ryan Brooks came to Jake's ship for an emergency meeting with all the other captains. Amy Price looked very young and scared, but her eyes were determined. The other captains were experienced fighters, but Jake could see they all understood how bad things were. They had trained for battles against pirates or other humans, but never against aliens with ships this powerful. Jake made the hardest decision of his life. He told his captains that they would stay and fight to give the civilians time to escape. Some of the captains argued that it was suicide, but Jake reminded them of their oath to protect innocent people. Ryan Brooks smiled and said he had always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. Amy Price nodded and said her ship was ready to fight. As the hour passed, Jake thought about Lisa and all the families on New Horizon. He thought about children playing in parks and farmers growing food and teachers helping students learn. People trusted him to keep them safe, and he would not let them down even if it meant dying in space far from home. When War Marshal Zethkol called again, Jake was ready with his answer. He looked at the alien commander's ugly face on his screen and spoke in a clear, strong voice. He told the alien that humans did not surrender and that if he wanted New Horizon, he would have to fight for it. The alien leader laughed and said that humans would learn what happened to species that defied the Kethvar dominion. Jake closed the channel and turned to his crew. He told them to prepare for battle and to remember that they were fighting for everyone they loved. The bridge crew worked quickly to get the ship ready, and Jake sent a final message to Lisa telling her he loved her. Then he gave the order for all human ships to move forward, and the battle for New Horizon began. The first shots fired in the battle came from the alien ships, and they were more powerful than anything Jake had ever seen. Beams of red energy cut through space and hit the UHS Valor with incredible force. Captain Ryan Brooks tried to dodge, but his ship was too slow and the alien weapons were too accurate. The energy beams went right through the Valor's shields like they were made of paper. Jake watched in horror as Ryan's ship began to break apart. The hull cracked and atmosphere rushed out into space carrying pieces of metal and equipment with it. Ryan's voice came over the radio and he sounded calm, even though his ship was dying around him. He told Jake that his engines were gone and his weapons were offline, but he still had one way to hurt the aliens. Ryan turned his broken ship toward the biggest alien vessel and pushed his engines to maximum power. The Valor moved slowly, but it kept going forward even as more alien weapons hit it. Jake shouted for Ryan to eject in an escape pod, but his friend just laughed and said someone had to show these aliens that humans were not afraid to die fighting. The Valor crashed into the alien flagship with a bright flash of light and a massive explosion. For a moment, Jake thought Ryan had done real damage, but when the light faded, the alien ship was still there. The explosion had barely scratched its dark hull, and Jake realized how outmatched they really were. The alien shields were stronger than anything humans had built, and their armor was thicker than entire human ships. War Marshal Zeth Cole's voice filled the radio channels, and he sounded amused rather than angry. He said that humans fought like wild animals instead of intelligent beings, and that such desperate attacks only proved they were ready to surrender. The alien commander told his ships to finish off the remaining human vessels quickly so they could begin taking control of the planet. Jake knew they could not win a direct fight, so he made a new plan. He ordered all human ships to retreat toward the asteroid belt that surrounded New Horizon. The asteroids were left over from when the solar system first formed, and they made a maze of rocks floating in space. The alien ships were much bigger than human ships, which meant they would have trouble moving through the tight spaces between asteroids. Lieutenant Commander Amy Price understood Jake's plan immediately, and her ship was the first to reach the asteroid field. She was an excellent pilot, and she flew her ship between rocks that were only a few meters apart. The alien ships tried to follow, but they were too large and had to slow down to avoid crashing into the asteroids. Chief Engineer Carlos Martinez was working on Jake's ship, and he came to the bridge with an idea. He told Jake that the mining companies had left thousands of explosive charges on the asteroids to break them apart and harvest valuable metals. Carlos thought they could use these charges as weapons if they could figure out how to set them off when alien ships flew nearby. Amy Price heard Carlos's idea over the radio, and she got very excited. She told Jake that her ship had equipment for controlling mining robots, and she might be able to trigger the charges remotely. Jake told her to try it, and Amy began flying her ship toward an asteroid that had mining charges attached to it. Down on the planet, Lisa was working frantically to help evacuate civilians, but she knew there was not enough time. The transport ships were loading people as fast as possible, but the alien fleet was getting closer to the planet every minute. Lisa made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She told the evacuation coordinators that she was staying to help the medical staff treat wounded soldiers and civilians. Lisa sent a message to the colony's industrial engineers and asked them to meet her at the main factory complex. When they arrived, she explained that they needed to start building weapons and supplies for the fleet. The engineers said it was impossible because their factories were designed to make farming equipment and consumer goods, not military hardware. Lisa smiled and told them that humans had always been good at making tools for whatever job needed to be done. She reminded them that every piece of technology could be used as a weapon if people were creative enough. The engineers looked at each other and then began discussing how they could convert their production lines to make ammunition and spare parts for the ships. Back in space, Amy Price had successfully triggered her first mining charge. When an alien cruiser flew past the asteroid, the explosion damaged its shields and forced it to retreat. The alien ships began to realize that the asteroid field was more dangerous than they had thought, and they started moving more carefully. Jake used this delay to reorganize his remaining ships. He had lost 4 vessels in the first attack, but the other 11 were still fighting. He divided them into small groups that could move quickly through the asteroids and attack different alien ships at the same time. This made it harder for the aliens to concentrate their firepower on any single human vessel. Carlos Martinez had been working on another idea while Amy was setting off mining charges. He discovered that human torpedo guidance systems could be modified to work with the mining charges. This meant they could turn asteroids into guided missiles that would fly toward alien ships and explode on impact. The first guided asteroid attack caught the aliens completely by surprise. They watched a large rock suddenly change direction and fly straight at one of their ships. The alien captain tried to destroy the asteroid with his weapons, but the explosion happened too close to his vessel and damaged its engines severely. War Marshal Zethkol was becoming frustrated with the battle. His ships were designed to fight other fleets in open space, not to chase small vessels through fields of explosive rocks. He ordered his commanders to pull back and use long-range weapons to destroy the asteroids, but this strategy was slow and gave the humans more time to prepare. Lisa's message to the fleet became famous among the human crews. She told Jake that the colony's factories were now working around the clock to produce weapons and supplies. She said that if the aliens wanted a war, humans would give them one they would never forget. Her words spread from ship to ship, and the crews began to fight with new determination, knowing that everyone on the planet was supporting them. The battle had been going on for 6 hours, and Jake knew his people were getting tired. The alien ships were damaged, but they still had overwhelming firepower and numbers. Jake looked at the tactical display and saw that more alien ships were moving toward the planet, while others kept his fleet busy in the asteroid field. He realized that this was just the beginning of a much longer and more desperate fight. 3 days had passed since the battle began, and Jake's fleet was running out of everything they needed to keep fighting. Ammunition was low, several ships had damaged engines, and his crews were exhausted from constant combat. The alien fleet still had over 150 ships, while Jake had only 9 vessels left that could still fight effectively. That morning brought news that changed everything. Admiral Kate Sullivan's voice came over the long-range communicator and told Jake that reinforcements were on their way. 30 human ships were coming through hyperspace and would arrive within hours. Jake felt hope for the first time since the battle started, but he knew 30 ships still would not be enough to defeat the massive alien fleet. The reinforcements arrived just as War Marshal Zethkol was preparing his final attack on New Horizon. Admiral Sullivan's fleet came out of hyperspace behind the alien ships and immediately began firing. The aliens were surprised by this attack from a new direction and had to divide their attention between Jake's ships in the asteroid field and Sullivan's fleet in open space. Captain Beth Turner commanded one of the new ships called the UHS Guardian, and she brought an idea that no military academy had ever taught. Her ship was loaded with civilian freighters that had been converted into fire ships. These vessels had their cargo holds packed with fusion reactors that were set to overload and explode. Beth planned to fly these ships directly into the alien formation and detonate them like massive bombs. The alien commanders could not understand this strategy because it meant deliberately destroying human ships and killing the crews inside them. In Kethvar culture, warriors were supposed to preserve their vessels and retreat when defeat seemed certain. The idea of using ships as weapons seemed wasteful and illogical to them. Beth Turner led the first fireship attack herself. She flew, a converted cargo hauler, straight toward the center of the alien fleet, while enemy weapons fired at her from all directions. Her ship's hull began to melt from the energy beams, but she kept flying forward until she was surrounded by alien vessels. Then she triggered the fusion reactor overload, and her ship exploded with the force of a small star. The explosion destroyed 6 alien cruisers and damaged 12 others. The blast was so powerful that it created a shock wave that knocked other ships off course and disrupted their shields. War Marshal Zeth Cole had never seen an enemy deliberately sacrifice so many resources for such a small tactical advantage, and he began to wonder if humans understood warfare at all. Down on New Horizon, the civilian population was refusing to evacuate, even though transport ships were available. Tony Garcia had been a mining foreman before the war started, and now he was leading a group of workers who were building weapons from industrial equipment. They had taken apart the colony's cargo loading cranes and rebuilt them as massive railguns that could fire projectiles into space. Lisa Morrison was working with the colony's medical facilities to create new types of weapons that nobody had ever imagined before. She discovered that the nanobots used in human medical treatment could be modified to eat through metal and plastic. These tiny robots were designed to repair damaged tissue, but Lisa programmed them to attack the materials used in alien armor and ship hulls. The modified nanobots were loaded into missiles and fired at alien ships during the next battle. When the missiles hit their targets, the nanobots spread across the hull like a disease and began dissolving the metal. The alien crews watched in horror as their supposedly invincible armor started to fall apart and create holes that vented atmosphere into space. War Marshal Zeth Cole called an emergency meeting with his ship commanders because nothing was going according to their battle plans. The Kethvar military had conquered dozens of species using proven strategies, but humans kept doing things that made no sense. They sacrificed valuable ships, turned medical equipment into weapons, and refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. One of the alien commanders suggested that humans might be suffering from a species-wide mental illness that prevented them from thinking logically. Another commander pointed out that human tactics were actually working despite being illogical. The aliens were losing ships and taking damage, while the humans continued to fight with determination that seemed to grow stronger after every defeat. Jake. Morrison coordinated the defense from his position in the asteroid field, and he began to see patterns in how the aliens fought. They preferred to use overwhelming firepower from long range, and they expected enemies to retreat when faced with superior numbers. The aliens had trouble adapting when human tactics forced them into close combat or unusual situations. Amy Price had become an expert at using the asteroid field as a weapon. She could trigger mining charges with perfect timing and guide explosive asteroids toward alien ships with incredible accuracy. Her ship had been damaged several times, but her crew kept it running with spare parts and determination. Amy realized that the aliens were getting frustrated and making mistakes because they could not predict what humans would do next. The breakthrough came when Chief Engineer Carlos Martinez figured out how to coordinate attacks between the fleet and the planet-based weapons. Tony Garcia's railguns could fire projectiles that would arrive at the same time as torpedoes from the ships. This meant the aliens had to defend against attacks coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Beth Turner organized the second fireship attack with even more ships than the first time. She had convinced dozens of civilian cargo pilots to volunteer for suicide missions because they believed their sacrifice would save the colony. The alien fleet tried to intercept the fireships before they could reach their targets, but human fighters flew alongside them and provided cover. The second fireship attack was even more devastating than the first. 15 converted freighters exploded among the alien fleet and destroyed or damaged over 30 enemy vessels. War Marshal Zeth Cole watched his supposedly invincible armada taking heavy losses from an enemy that should have been defeated days ago. Lisa Morrison's nanobots were spreading through the alien fleet like a plague. Ships that had been hit by the medical weapons were developing structural failures as their hulls were eaten away by millions of tiny robots. Some alien vessels had to abandon entire sections of their ships because the nanobots could not be stopped once they started consuming the metal. The most shocking moment came when a group of human civilians announced that they were staying on New Horizon to fight regardless of the danger. Mary Johnson had been a military pilot before becoming a cargo hauler, and she organized civilian ships into a defensive squadron. Her husband Kevin was a doctor who helped convert farming equipment into anti-aircraft weapons. War Marshal Zethkol realized that he was not just fighting human soldiers, but an entire species that refused to accept defeat. Every time his forces destroyed human ships or weapons, the remaining humans seemed to fight even harder. The alien commander had conquered many worlds, but he had never encountered an enemy that became more dangerous as they took losses. The battle was entering its fourth day and both sides were exhausted, but the humans showed no signs of giving up. Jake Morrison's fleet was down to 6 operational ships, but they were still fighting effectively using the asteroids for cover. Admiral Sullivan's reinforcements had lost half their vessels, but the survivors continued to attack with desperate courage. The alien fleet still had numerical superiority, but War Marshal Zethkol was beginning to doubt that numbers alone would be enough to defeat these strange humans who treated death as just another weapon to be used against their enemies. Engineer Sam Parker was working in the damaged engine room of the UHS Liberty when she made a discovery that would change the entire battle. Her ship had been hit by alien weapons 3 times, and most of its systems were barely functioning, but Sam refused to give up trying to find ways to hurt the enemy. She had been studying the energy patterns from alien shield systems and noticed something that everyone else had missed. The Kethvar shields operated on a rotating frequency that changed every few seconds to prevent enemies from finding weaknesses. Sam realized that if human weapons could be synchronized to fire at exactly the right moment, they could penetrate the alien defenses. The problem was that the timing had to be perfect, and there was no room for error. Sam called Jake Morrison and explained her discovery. She told him that she could modify human weapons to match the alien shield frequency, but it would require all ships to fire at exactly the same instant. If even one ship fired too early or too late, the entire attack would fail, and the aliens would realize what humans were trying to do. Jake understood that this was their best chance to level the playing field against the superior alien technology. He called all ship captains and explained Sam's plan. The attack would require incredible coordination and trust because each ship would have to rely on the others to fire at precisely the right moment. Any mistake would waste their ammunition and possibly get them all killed. Captain Danny Foster commanded the UHS Resilience, and he volunteered to lead the synchronized attack against the alien flagship. Danny was an experienced pilot who had been fighting in space for over 20 years, and his crew trusted him completely. He told Jake that his ship would target the alien command vessel, while the other ships attacked different targets throughout the enemy fleet. The first synchronized attack was set for dawn on the 5th day of battle. Sam Parker had worked through the night to modify the targeting systems on every human ship. Amy Price used her knowledge of asteroid mining to calculate the exact timing needed for the weapons to fire together. The plan was complicated and dangerous, but it was the only way to break through alien shields. When the moment came, Jake gave the signal and every human ship fired at exactly the same instant. The coordinated barrage caught the aliens completely by surprise because their shields had never been penetrated before. Danny Foster's attack on the flagship was particularly effective, and his torpedoes punched through the alien armor and destroyed the ship's main weapon systems. War Marshal Zethkol felt his flagship shake as human weapons hit areas that should have been protected. For the first time since the battle began, he realized that these primitive humans might actually be capable of defeating his advanced fleet. The alien commander ordered his ships to increase shield rotation speed, but Sam Parker had already anticipated this move and adjusted the human targeting systems accordingly. The success of the synchronized attack gave humans hope, but it came at a terrible cost. Danny Foster's ship was heavily damaged when the aliens returned fire, and his bridge was completely destroyed. Danny's final transmission reached every human ship, and his words inspired the entire fleet. He told them to remember that they were fighting for their children and that no sacrifice was too great to keep them safe. On the planet below, the civilian population had transformed New Horizon into a fortress. Mary Johnson led civilian pilots in converted mining ships that attacked, alien fighters trying to reach the surface. Her husband, Kevin, had organized the medical staff to treat wounded soldiers and civilians while also producing more nanobots for the fleet to use as weapons. The most surprising development came from the farming community outside the main city. A group of agricultural workers, led by farmer Bill Patterson, had converted their crop harvesting machines into mobile missile launchers. They drove these improvised weapons across the countryside and fired at alien ships that flew too low over the planet's surface. Lisa Morrison was working with colony engineers to create the most ambitious weapon yet attempted. They were using the terraforming equipment that had originally been designed to change the planet's atmosphere to create a localized gravitational anomaly. If successful, this weapon could trap enemy ships and prevent them from escaping or maneuvering effectively. The gravitational weapon required enormous amounts of power, and Lisa had to convince the colony's administrators to shut down all non-essential systems, including hospitals and schools. The entire planet would be running on emergency power while the weapon charged, but Lisa believed it was their only chance to stop the alien fleet from destroying everything they had built. Jake Morrison was coordinating the space battle from his damaged ship when he received word that his wife was attempting something that had never been tried before. The idea of using terraforming equipment as a weapon seemed impossible, but Jake had learned not to underestimate human creativity and determination. He told Lisa that the fleet would be ready to attack when she activated her gravitational trap. Sam. Parker had continued working on ways to improve human weapons, and she discovered that the alien ships had a weakness in their engine systems. If human ships could get close enough to fire directly into the alien engine ports, they could cause catastrophic damage that would disable entire vessels. The problem was that getting close enough required flying through intense defensive fire that would probably destroy any ship that tried it. Amy Price volunteered to attempt the close-range engine attacks because her ship was the fastest and most maneuverable in the fleet. She had been fighting in the asteroid field for days and knew how to use cover and timing to avoid enemy weapons. Amy told Jake that she was ready to try anything that might help win the battle. The engine attack required Amy to fly her ship directly toward an alien cruiser, while enemy weapons fired at her from all directions. She used pieces of destroyed asteroids as shields and flew in an unpredictable pattern that made it difficult for alien gunners to target her accurately. When she was close enough, Amy fired all her remaining torpedoes directly into the alien ship's engine ports. The explosion that followed was more powerful than anyone expected. The alien cruiser's engines overloaded and created a chain reaction that destroyed the entire ship and damaged two others nearby. Amy's ship was caught in the blast and severely damaged, but she managed to fly back to the asteroid field where Carlos Martinez's repair crews could work on it. War Marshal Zeth Cole was becoming desperate as his fleet continued to take losses from human attacks that should have been impossible. His tactical computers could not predict human behavior because humans consistently chose options that seemed to guarantee their own destruction. The alien commander had never fought an enemy that treated their own lives as expendable resources, to be used for tactical advantage. The most frustrating aspect of fighting humans was that they seemed to get stronger every time they were hurt. When the aliens destroyed human ships, the remaining crews fought with even greater determination. When human weapons failed, they found new ways to turn ordinary equipment into deadly devices. When faced with certain defeat, they chose to sacrifice themselves in ways that maximized damage to the enemy. Kevin Johnson had been working with his medical team to create a new type of nanobot that could reproduce itself using materials found on alien ships. These self-replicating nanobots would spread through enemy vessels like a virus and eventually consume entire ships from the inside. Kevin knew that releasing such weapons was dangerous because they might be difficult to control, but the colony was running out of options. The battle had been raging for almost a week and both sides were exhausted, but neither was willing to surrender. Jake Morrison looked at his tactical display and saw that his fleet was down to 4 operational ships, while the aliens still had over 80 vessels. The numbers looked hopeless, but Jake knew that humans had already achieved the impossible by surviving this long against overwhelming odds. Lisa Morrison's gravitational weapon was almost ready to activate, and she sent a message to the fleet telling them to prepare for the most dangerous gamble of the entire war. If her weapon worked, it would trap a large portion of the alien fleet and give humans a chance to destroy them. If it failed, the planet would be defenseless, and the battle would be over. The second week of battle began with something that had never happened in Kethvar military history. War Marshal Zeth Cole was losing a war against an enemy that should have been crushed in the first day of fighting. His fleet had been reduced to 70 operational ships, while the humans still had 3 vessels that continued to fight with impossible determination and skill. Lisa Morrison activated her gravitational weapon just as the alien fleet was preparing, what they thought would be their final assault on New Horizon. The terraforming equipment created a massive distortion in local space-time that caught 30 alien ships in an invisible trap. The vessels found themselves unable to move or escape as gravitational forces held them in place, like insects caught in a web. Jake Morrison immediately ordered his remaining ships to attack the trapped alien vessels. Sam Parker's synchronized firing technique allowed human weapons to penetrate alien shields, while the enemy ships could not maneuver to avoid incoming fire. In less than an hour, the humans destroyed 15 alien cruisers and damaged 10 others so severely that they had to withdraw from the battle. War Marshal Zeth Cole watched in disbelief as his most powerful ships were systematically destroyed by an enemy that had been outnumbered 20-1. The gravitational trap was unlike any weapon he had ever encountered, and it proved that humans could turn even peaceful technology into instruments of war. The alien commander began to wonder if his people had made a terrible mistake by attacking this species. Captain Nina Ross had arrived with Admiral Sullivan's reinforcement fleet, and she specialized in stealth operations. Nina's ship was equipped with experimental technology that could shut down its power core completely and drift through space like a piece of debris. She used this ability to get close to alien ships without being detected and then attack them from point-blank range. Nina's stealth attacks were particularly effective because the aliens had never fought an enemy that could make ships invisible to their sensors. She would drift near alien vessels for hours, pretending to be wreckage from destroyed ships, and then suddenly power up and fire all weapons at once. The psychological effect on alien crews was devastating because they never knew when a piece of debris might suddenly come alive and attack them. On New Horizon, the civilian population had become a military force unlike anything seen in galactic history. Chief Scientist Alan Wright was working with Lisa Morrison to weaponize every piece of equipment on the planet. They had turned weather control satellites into orbital bombardment platforms and converted underground mining tunnels into missile silos that could strike at ships in orbit. The most effective civilian fighters were the farmers who had experience operating heavy machinery in difficult conditions. Bill Patterson led a group of agricultural workers who had mounted weapons on their farming vehicles and were using them to hunt alien landing parties. These improvised tanks were slow but heavily armored and could carry enough ammunition to fight for days without resupplying. Mary Johnson had organized civilian pilots into squadrons that flew coordinated attacks against alien fighters. Her background as a military pilot helped her train cargo haulers and transport crews to fight. Like experienced combat pilots, the civilian ships were not designed for warfare, but human creativity had turned them into effective weapons platforms. Kevin Johnson's self-replicating nanobots were spreading through the alien fleet like a plague. Ships that had been infected days earlier were now completely consumed by the tiny robots and had to be abandoned by their crews. The nanobots were programmed to multiply using any available metal, which meant they could eventually destroy entire vessels if left unchecked. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Chief Scientist Alan Wright discovered how to combine Lisa's gravitational technology with the colony's industrial equipment. He created a weapon that could generate focused gravitational pulses strong enough to crush alien ships like empty cans. The weapon required the entire planet's power grid to operate, but it could destroy even the largest alien vessels with a single shot. Jake Morrison coordinated the most ambitious attack in human military history. Every remaining ship, missile, and improvised weapon would strike simultaneously from 12 different directions. The attack required perfect timing and would probably destroy most of the human fleet in the process, but it was their only chance to defeat the remaining alien forces. Amy Price had become the fleet's tactical coordinator because her experience in the asteroid field had taught her how to predict alien ship movements. She calculated the exact position where each human ship needed to be and the precise moment when they should fire. The plan was so complex that even small mistakes could cause the entire attack to fail. War Marshal Zeth Cole realized that his invasion was doomed when human attacks began coming from directions that should have been impossible. Ships appeared out of nowhere to attack his fleet and then disappeared before his forces could respond. Weapons that had never existed before were destroying his most advanced vessels, and his crews were becoming demoralized by fighting an enemy they could not understand. The final assault began at dawn on the 14th day of battle. Jake Morrison led his ship directly toward the alien flagship, while Nina Ross attacked from stealth and Amy Price coordinated strikes from the asteroid field. On the planet below, Alan Wright fired the gravitational pulse weapon at the center of the alien formation, while Bill Patterson's ground forces launched every missile they had built. The coordinated attack overwhelmed the alien defenses completely. Ships were destroyed by weapons firing from above, below, and all sides simultaneously. The gravitational pulse weapon crushed 6 alien cruisers and sent shock waves through space that disrupted the remaining ship's formation. Human nanobots continued eating through alien hulls, while gravitational traps prevented damaged vessels from escaping. Jake Morrison's ship took heavy damage as it approached the alien flagship, but he refused to retreat. The UHS Defiance had been his home for 5 years, and his crew had become like family to him. When alien weapons destroyed his ship's engines, Jake made a decision that would become legendary throughout human space. He ordered his crew to abandon ship and then flew directly into the alien flagship's bridge. The collision between Jake's ship and the alien command center created an explosion that could be seen from the planet's surface. Both vessels were severely damaged, but Jake survived the crash and found himself face-to-face with War Marshal Zeth Cole in the alien ship's command chamber. The alien leader was wounded and dying, but he looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. The battle for New Horizon was over. Of the 200 ships that had attacked the human colony, only 12 alien vessels remained, and they were fleeing toward hyperspace as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. The Kethvar Dominion had suffered its first military defeat in over 300 years, and the news would spread throughout the galaxy within days. Jake Morrison stood in the ruined alien command center, surrounded by smoke and debris. His own ship was destroyed and most of his fleet was gone, but New Horizon was safe. The colony had survived and its people were free to continue building their new world. War Marshal Zeth Cole looked up at Jake and asked the question that would echo through space for generations to come. The alien commander wanted to know why humans fought so hard for people who could not fight back. Jake's answer was simple, but it contained the essence of what made humanity different from every other species in the galaxy. He told the dying alien that protecting others was what made them human, and that some things were worth any sacrifice to preserve. War Marshal Zethkol lay dying in the wreckage of his command chamber and looked up at the human who had defeated his mighty fleet. The alien commander had conquered 47 different species across the galaxy, but none of them had fought. Like these strange creatures who seemed to value other lives more than their own. Blood was flowing from wounds that would soon kill him, but Zethkol needed to understand what had happened before he died. Jake Morrison stood over the fallen alien, leader with his uniform torn and his face covered with dust from the explosion. His ship was destroyed and most of his friends were dead, but the colony was safe, and that was all that mattered to him. When the alien asked why humans fought so desperately to protect others, Jake gave an answer that would become famous throughout: known space. Jake told the dying war marshal that protecting those who could not protect themselves was what made humans different from other species. He explained that humans measured success not by how much they conquered, but by how many lives they saved. The alien commander listened to these words and realized that his people had encountered something they had never seen before in all their wars of conquest. Zethkol used his last breath to make a final entry in his personal log. He recorded that humans could not be defeated because they did not know how to surrender, and that even in death they claimed victory. The alien leader admitted that his people had conquered many worlds, but had never encountered a spirit like the one humans possessed. He ended his log by suggesting that perhaps conquest had never been the Kethvar's greatest strength after all. News of the victory at New Horizons spread through space faster than anyone expected. The Kethvar had never retreated from any battle. In their history, and other alien species took notice of this unprecedented event. Within weeks, every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy knew that a small human colony had defeated the most powerful military force anyone had ever seen. The battle cost humanity 60% of its defense fleet and thousands of civilian lives, but New Horizons survived and grew stronger. Jake Morrison was promoted to admiral and became the symbol of human determination throughout the galaxy. His story was told on every human world and inspired a new generation of people to join the space service and defend their colonies. Lisa. Morrison's medical innovations revolutionized battlefield medicine and saved countless lives in future conflicts. Her work with nanobots led to new treatments for diseases and injuries that had been considered incurable. The techniques she developed during the siege were adopted by multiple alien species who recognized the value of human medical technology. Thutter colony of New Horizon was rebuilt with better defenses and more advanced technology than before. A monument was erected in the center of the main city listing the name of every human who died defending the colony. The inscription on the monument became famous throughout human space and read that these people had stood so others could live and fought so others could be free. Captain Amy Price became the youngest admiral in human history and developed new tactics based on her experience fighting in the asteroid field. Her innovations in asymmetric warfare were studied by military academies across the galaxy and influenced how smaller forces could defeat larger enemies. Amy's methods proved that creativity and determination could overcome superior numbers and technology. Sam Parker's discoveries about alien shield technology led to breakthroughs in human defensive systems. Her work on synchronized firing techniques was adopted by every human fleet and gave them the ability to penetrate enemy defenses that had previously been considered impregnable. Sam became the chief engineer for all human space forces and continued developing new weapons throughout her career. The civilian heroes of New Horizon became legends in their own right. Tony Garcia was appointed as the head of planetary defense and built fortifications that could protect against much larger invasion forces. Bill Patterson's agricultural warfare techniques were taught to farming communities throughout human space and proved that ordinary people could become effective fighters when their homes were threatened. Mary Johnson established the first civilian pilot training program that taught cargo haulers and transport crews how to fight in space battles. Her husband, Kevin, founded a medical research institute that continued developing nanobotic weapons and treatments. Together, they proved that civilians could make the difference between victory and defeat in military conflicts. Chief Scientist. Alan Wright's gravitational weapons became standard equipment on human worlds and provided a defense against invasion fleets. His work with terraforming technology showed that peaceful tools could be converted into powerful weapons when the need arose. Alan's innovations influenced human industrial design for decades and made colonies more self-sufficient. The psychological impact of the victory was even more important than the technological advances. Throughout the galaxy, other species began to understand that humans operated by different rules than anyone else. When humans promised to protect someone, they would die before breaking that promise. When they said never again, they meant it completely, and would fight to the last person to prevent tragedy. The phrase human determination entered dozens of alien languages and became synonymous with refusing to surrender regardless of the odds. Diplomatic negotiations changed because other species knew that humans would never abandon their principles even when threatened with destruction. This reputation made humans valuable allies and dangerous enemies throughout known space. War Marshal. Zeth Cole's final log entry was discovered years later when salvage crews explored the wreckage of his flagship. His assessment of humanity became required reading at military academies across the galaxy because it explained why conventional tactics failed against human forces. The alien commander's words proved that even enemies could recognize and respect human courage. Several alien species requested to study human military tactics and psychology to understand how such a small force had defeated the mighty Kethvar fleet. These studies led to new theories about warfare and the importance of morale and motivation in determining battle outcomes. Human fighting spirit became a subject of academic research throughout the galaxy. The Kethvar Dominion never recovered from their defeat at New Horizon. Their reputation for invincibility was shattered, and several of their conquered species began rebellions inspired by the human example. Within 10 years, the Dominion had collapsed and been replaced by smaller independent governments that treated their citizens more fairly. Jake Morrison married Lisa again in a ceremony held on New Horizon 5 years after the battle. Their daughter, Rachel, was born the following year and grew up hearing stories about the brave people who had saved the colony. Rachel decided to join the space service when she turned 18 and carried forward the legacy of those who proved that humanity's greatest weapon was their unbreakable will to protect what they loved. The Battle of New Horizon became the most studied military engagement in galactic history. Military commanders from dozens of species analyzed every aspect of the fighting to understand how humans had achieved the impossible. The battle proved that superior technology and numbers meant nothing when facing an enemy that refused to accept defeat. 20 years later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of a new ship and looked out at the stars. New Horizon had become one of the most prosperous colonies in human space and home to over 10 million people. The galaxy was a safer place, because other species knew that humans would fight to defend innocent people regardless of the cost. The legacy of New Horizon lived on in every human who chose to serve others before themselves. The phrase "they stood so others could live" became the motto of human space forces and reminded everyone that some things were worth any sacrifice to preserve. The battle had proved that humans could not be defeated because they measured victory differently than anyone else in the galaxy.